All right. Doors are closed, now you can't leave. It'll be really obvious if you do. First of all, oh, they're open again. You could still run now. You could still run. First of all, I realised this talk is on at the same time as a talk about how to save the planet. So really appreciate that you came. Perhaps interrogate why you came instead of going to that one. But I'm honoured and concerned that you're here. Let's get into it. This is workshop design and facilitation for game studios. Anyone know what that means? Sweet, Liam knows. Do you want to do the talk? All right. Cool. Okay, hi. I'm Ali. I'm the production director at League of Geeks, which is exciting. It's the first time I've said that at a conference. I very occasionally also write a production newsletter called The Working Lunch, which is on Substack, and you can subscribe to that for free to receive 1 to 2 emails from me a year, just like when I could be bothered. But I promise they're worth it, so I'd love if you would sign up. In terms of workshop design and facilitation, I have worked in indie dev, I've worked in AAA, I've worked in serious games, I've worked on like original IP, narrative stuff, I've done client work, I've done lots of stuff. I haven't done VR, so that's interesting. I'm trying to say I've worked on lots of different types of projects, and throughout those kind of different experiences, there's sort of one constant need, and that is at different stages of a project, you kind of just need to be able to get people in a room and get all the ideas out of their head without it going catastrophically wrong, which is really hard. I have had some devastating experiences in brainstorming sessions and like design sprints and creative workshops and all that kind of stuff. And I basically think that I've come to the conclusion that the process of hosting and facilitating workshops in games is one of the most underestimated and misunderstood parts of doing this work. I also think it's conveniently one of the things I'm very good at because I've put a lot of hours of research into it, and I've had some pretty unique opportunities to try it within lots of different projects and lots of different teams. So today I'm going to take you through as much of the stuff that I've learned as I can manage, starting with the definition of a workshop. Oxford English, no. For the purposes of this talk, when I say workshop, I'm talking about like an infrequent type of big event thing where you have a specific problem that you're trying to accomplish, like finding a path towards or finding an actual solution towards or making a decision about, and you need a specific group of people to come together and kind of hash it out. So what I'm not talking about is like a regular ceremony like sprint planning or any of your kind of regular planning type things. This stuff that we're getting into today, it requires a bunch of time investment, like to plan it well, it requires a bunch of effort to facilitate it well, and probably for most game teams it's not something that makes sense to do all the time. I'm not going to put a number on it, like every 6 to 8 weeks or something like that, but it's not something that you would do frequently. So types of workshops could be like a design workshop, trying to crack a specific design problem, like how does this thing fit into our overall design philosophy. Could be like team policy making workshop, like we have a bunch of problems in the way that we're working together and we need to come together and come up with different solutions to that and agree on like a team charter. Could be like a business strategy workshop. I have no idea what that would entail. All of these things have specific problems they're trying to solve, and they have specific outcomes that they want from the workshop. So if we take the example of like a product chartering workshop, the outcome maybe you want is you get all of your stakeholders in a room and you want to decide on like your project mission statement. I realize a bunch of these words don't mean anything, but we're going to talk about what they mean. Project mission statement for the project and the specific metrics that are important to achieve that mission. And so the outcome of that is like the team knows how the business is going to measure the success of the project, which is very helpful. Does that make sense? Do we know what a workshop is? I'm seeing some thumbs up. That's right, it's a big meeting. Yay! So the change I'd like to make in your brains today is to stop thinking about a workshop as a big meeting and start thinking about it as an experience that you need to design. And I know how that sounds, but I promise it's going to make sense at the end of this talk. So we make games, most of us, and we know that when we're designing experiences, you need to think about a lot of different things at once. You need to think about engagement, so like length of time, you need to keep people engaged, how you're engaging them, visual impact, the visuals we want people to engage with, does it feel nice, how does it make them feel, the emotional response, what feelings do we want people to have during the workshop, after the workshop, what feelings might they have coming into it, and the message, so the key information that you want to extract from the experience. So I'm going to talk you through each of these components and how they relate to designing and facilitating a workshop. It's going to start with engagement. So keeping people engaged for a long workshop is impossible, and you shouldn't try. If you've ever worked at a medium to large size company, I'm willing to bet that you have sat in a workshop and been bored out of your mind. So the hard truth is people generally don't want to be there. People don't want to be in a big meeting. People don't want to sit in a meeting all day. No matter how good or passionate they are, it's draining. And they probably have other stuff that they need to do. So my advice is accept this as fact at the outset of designing your workshop and make the assumption that you will not have people functioning at 100% the whole time. And what's good is once you know this, you can design a workshop that is effective within this reality where your attendees are not robots, but they're human beings who have like push notifications and laundry. And so once you say, you like that one, that was good. Once you say, I actually don't need everyone to be fully engaged all the time for this to still be really worth it for us, you're already like 10 steps ahead of the average kind of workshop designer. So what does it look like to incorporate that knowledge that we don't have people engaged the whole time? What does it look like to incorporate that into a design process? The first thing is you need to know why you're having the workshop. What is the function? What is the big picture? What is the output? So like, for example, we need to have a workshop because everyone's got all these ideas for these mini games that we've talked about having, but we're all kind of misaligned on which of these ideas actually work and which of them are aligned with our overall design philosophy, and we don't want this to feel disjointed. So we want to come together and make decisions about which of these ideas is worth prototyping. So great, now you have this. You now need to break that goal down into components and understand what you need from each component. So I'm going to just give you some quick examples of components for a workshop. You can have crazy eights, you can have SWOT analysis, you can have how might we statements, you can have hopes and fears, you can do impact effort maps or empathy maps. Now, if you don't know what any of that is, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Just like your production methodology, as has been proven, my take is it doesn't make a difference what format you're using or what activity you're doing. What matters is that you understand it. You understand it well and you communicate it really clearly to everybody who's participating. The great news is there are so many resources out there about all of these things, about all these different kind of workshop formats and activities that you can do. Once you start Googling this stuff, you realize that like half the internet is dedicated to this kind of material. So I'm not going to take you through this. This is not what we're going to talk about today because you simply don't need me to do that. You can Google it. I would recommend in terms of like a high quality resource for this thing, and this is not an ad, but it is a paid resource. It's called PipDeck's Workshop Tactics. It's spelled PIPDECKS if you're writing it down. It gives you like a strategy system. It's like a PDF, or you can also get a physical version of it. It gives you like a strategy system of different types of like problems you're trying to solve and different types of components of like meetings or workshops that you can do to try and solve those types of problems. There are not many professional resources that I have read more than once. This PDF sits on my desktop. I look at it all the time. It's pure gold. It is a bit expensive. It's about $100, but I think it's really worth it. I'm not going to say buy it once and share it with your friends, but that could be something somebody does. So once you've decided on your workshop goals and you understand what the components of your workshop are, you want to end up with like a summary that looks kind of like this, where you have, okay, we have our goal, we have our activities, and we know what the purpose of each of our activities is. The specifics of this don't matter, but that's just an example. And then here's where we take it to the next level. This is like everyone who's putting a workshop together does this. This is baby stuff, okay? We're all going to go to the next level together. We're talking about engagement, where we're accepting the fact that not everyone's going to be engaged 100% for the whole time. We know that people have laundry to do. So we then want to map everyone who is participating in the workshop, and we want to think about where are the areas that they can provide the most value. So this is how we get to point 3, which is people engage with things because they think it's worth it for them. Now that can sound kind of cynical. You might think, well, people on my team engage with things because they love me. No, they engage with it because it's worth their time. So my advice to you is to spend your pre-workshop time making sure everybody else knows how they can provide the most value to the workshop. People love to feel valuable, and giving them the opportunity to know where you're looking to them for insight is really helpful. This can look like a 5-minute conversation with somebody in the week leading up to your workshop where you're like, hey, Liam, I know that you're really good at reframing problems as possible solutions. So when we get to the how might we statements part of the workshop, I'm looking at you like I'm expecting you to help me out in this area. That takes 2 seconds. Liam feels great right now. And everybody understands what their value is to the workshop. And then when we get to that part, their ears perk up. They're like, this is my time to shine. So if you give everybody that moment, it's a great way to move your workshop from like big meeting zone into like exciting opportunity for everybody to be engaged and everyone to see everyone at their best. And the best way to have these pre-workshop conversations is to have something to show, which takes us to the next component of our experience design, and actually my favorite part, and that is the visuals, visual impact. So, building visual familiarity. You may have noticed so far in this presentation, we are building a beautiful little worm dude. Do you see him? Do you see him coming together? So I am doing this on purpose. I am hoping that this visual is going to build some kind of mental link for you. I'm hoping that in future, when you think about a workshop, you're going to think about the worm. And you're going to think about how he's got lots of different pieces that are all different but connected, and like when assembled can be really beautiful. I'm not saying that you should put a worm in all of your workshops, but I'm not saying that. It's really helpful to have some kind of visual that is memorable, because if your workshop results are worthwhile, you're probably going to need to refer back to them. You're probably going to need to have conversations about them. And if you have a strong visual cue that people can be like, oh yeah, that was in the worm meeting, then it's just way faster. People get back into the headspace of where they were when they were participating in the workshop. So I think it's great to build use your visuals strategically to build mental connections. I wouldn't go so far as to say that your workshop needs a brand, but it doesn't hurt to have a mascot. So that, similarly to the worm idea, but a bit different, I think it's worthwhile to incorporate a sense of play into your workshop. Something you should know about me. You will not find somebody who hates forced fun more than me. I did a training course, which I won't name, where at various points in the workshop, they like played upbeat music, and everyone had to like get up out of their chair with like throw an invisible ball to each other and like run on the spot. And basically, from the first time that they did that, I did not retain any information from the course after that point. Like, I hate fun. So when I say embrace playfulness, I don't mean do that shit. I mean, like, don't add meaningless activities to your workshop. I mean, think deeply about the people. Someone's taking a photo of I hate fun. That's the slide. I knew I'd regret this. Think about the people that you have in your workshop and think about what kind of playfulness is going to suit them. So my go-to sort of lazy version of this, if I'm being honest with you, is usually I'm doing like virtual workshops, or there is some kind of virtual element to it because some people are remote. So we're usually using like a Miro board to be like the home of the workshop. And at the start of the workshop, I'll have a little section that has everybody's names, and I just ask everyone to choose an emoji that best represents who they are. And it's cute. There's always a little bit of banter. Some people struggle with it and other people help them, and it's cute. It also gives you the opportunity to make sure everyone knows how to use the tools, and you identify if anybody doesn't know how to use them, and you can help them before you're like in the flow of actual stuff that you have to do. And what's great is it's over quickly and you don't have to spend too much time on it. I think playfulness can also look like just taking the time to make your workshop space look nice and be pleasant to be in. There are very few people who want to sit and stare at an Excel spreadsheet all day while also in a meeting the whole time. So investing some time in making your workshop space look nice and feel nice will just add to the experience of participating. We want people to feel good. When people feel good, they participate better. So this also includes stuff like don't be a cop. Like if you have like artists in your workshop who want to like doodle on the board or like throw memes and GIFs and stuff in, like let them do that. Like we were talking about earlier, not everyone's going to be engaged 100% the whole time, and a little bit of distraction in the long run is actually kind of helpful, especially if that distraction is like coming from inside the house. Like people are not, it's much more, I think, conducive to good results in your workshop if people are distracted by somebody doing something funny within the workshop space than if they're distracted by reading their emails or like scrolling through Twitter or something. Keeps the vibe open, keeps the vibe playful. We make games. Like we know that play is good. We know that play is conducive to learning. So don't stop people from playing. Also, just lastly, avoid overwhelming people. If you have a workshop that has multiple components and activities, it can feel really intense to see all of it at the beginning. So this is like a template Miro board for a design sprint. This is what a lot of workshops look like in like a virtual board space. And when I look at that, I just think homework. Like it doesn't make me feel excited or creative, or it just makes me feel like I have a lot of stuff that I need to do. So even if you are really good at explaining to people, oh no, like it's going to be good, I promise. Don't do it like that. People are going to look at the visuals and they're going to feel some sense of dread or overwhelm at best. So a simple piece of advice, just like hide things, look at stuff in chunks, only give people what they need to focus on right now. Try to keep your visuals focused and clean. The way that you deploy the visual components of your workshop experience, whether it be from like your mascot to the playfulness to cognitive overload, these things shape the way your participants feel when they're in your workshop in really impactful ways, and often in ways you are not even noticing. So that takes us to our next component, which is emotional response. So if you are having a workshop, as we've said, it's because you've got a bunch of people's different perspectives that you need to hear all at the same time. And this can be daunting, even for the most chillest of teams in the world. So if you're feeling a bit worried about like possible tension or heightened feelings that might happen in your workshop, this section is for you. So my first piece of advice is design for emotions, not against them. You want people to have strong feelings. Good games they're not made by companies, they're not made by processes, they're made by people who give a shit about what they're talking about. So we want people to have strong feelings when they're in our workshops, but we want those strong feelings to have somewhere helpful and productive to go. So the same way that we mapped our activities like this earlier, we mapped our outcomes and our participants, we did all that work. We can do the same thing, but for possible emotional hot zones. So if I think about a hypothetical example, like in this little purple workshop that we're doing, maybe I have like a leader on my team who has a tendency to overrule people. Somebody who, has a strong sense of ownership over the project, and when other people are making decisions, it kind of makes them uncomfortable, they feel out of control, they tend to have strong feelings about that kind of thing. Does it sound like a familiar kind of archetype to people? That sucks, but yeah. So in this workshop, the way that we're getting from hopes and fears to how might we statements, hopes and fears is like everybody's writing down really high level everything that they're excited about and everything that they're worried about. And then we're going to vote just on the stuff that we're worried about to see what the biggest shared worries are. So my concern is my overruler is not going to be cool with the fact that it's a democratic voting system. Like, they might feel a little bit like people are disagreeing with them, they might feel undermined, they might feel like they don't have control over the conversation. So I'm going to say that hopes and fears is like an emotional hot zone. So you can do that. You can look through your workshop, look through your activities, and think about what the emotional response might be for each person in your team, particularly the ones who are very influential, and just highlight for yourself. You don't have to share it with anybody. Highlight for yourself where you think those hot zones might be. And then you want to think about, in your agenda, where does that hot zone sit? Think about context, think about energy levels, think about how much time you're leaving for it. So there's 3 things that I do for an emotional hot zone in a workshop. One is I'm not going to have that conversation at the end of the day. If there's going to be something that's potentially spicy, I don't want to do it at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday when everybody is ready to get out of here. People are tired, their emotions are heightened, they're less good at regulating things. We just don't want to do that. Secondly, if you can, and you can't always do this, try to sandwich the spicier topics with things that are just a little easier. As we said, people's energy levels and their emotional engagement is going to rise and fall. Usually after a really intense conversation, people are going to drop off a little bit. So we don't want to do an emotional hot zone followed by the most important decision of the day. And even just having a break, like a 10-minute break afterwards, and then coming back to something that's a little bit less intense is a good way to ramp back up to your next thing. And lastly, just add buffer to everything in case you need to kind of go off-road. If there's a conversation that needs to happen in the room, you don't want to shut it down most of the time. You want to have that productive conversation. You're going to kick yourself if you don't have time in your agenda to do that, or if it's going to derail your whole workshop when it's something that was kind of predictable that it might happen. So general rule, I add 15 minutes for any kind of emotional hot zone, but obviously depends on your situation. All right, secondly, on emotional response. This is not something I do for every single workshop. It would probably make me lose my mind. I only really do it for very important ones with people who maybe don't usually work together, or just a workshop that has really high stakes. And that is thinking about the emotional journey that people might be on before the workshop, during the workshop, and after the workshop. So this is an example of what an emotional journey might look like. So I'm thinking about the archetype of a new team member who has to participate in a workshop in their first month or so. And I'm just trying to put myself in their shoes. How might they feel going into the workshop? They might be overwhelmed. It's kind of for anybody, it's a bit overwhelming joining a new company. I just joined a new company. This is not how I feel, but not at all. And then secondly, during the workshop, how might they feel? I'm new to the team. I want to show them I know what I'm talking about. I want to make sure I contribute really meaningfully. This is a good opportunity for me to be part of this conversation and to show them that I'm valuable to the team. Then after the workshop, maybe they're feeling a bit insecure. That was a really intense conversation. It all happened really fast. Did I make a fool of myself? Did I overstep? Did I not understand something? So that's a pretty common emotional journey for people going through something that is really important and a little bit stressful. This is just one journey, but you can kind of see how doing kind of an empathy exercise for the people who are participating in your workshop, it starts to give you ideas about what you might be able to do to help people, ease any feelings that might not be conducive to them contributing in the best way in the workshop, but also to kind of lean into any feelings that might actually be really helpful to make the workshop grow and evolve. And also just as a facilitator, it's good to just be thinking about how everybody feels, so that if you are seeing somebody behaving in a way that is maybe a little bit out of character, or they say a really loaded statement, if you've already kind of thought through, okay, what kind of headspace is this person in? Where are they coming from? How might this make them feel? You're better equipped to, move the conversation through those feelings. You may not be able to do all these things every time. This is a lot of work. But one thing I can guarantee you is that if you are having a workshop with humans, they are going to experience human emotion during the workshop. And if you're not thinking about that as part of your planning, then you're kind of doing yourself and the team a disservice. So whatever that looks like for you, just think about the fact that people are going to have feelings, basically. That brings us to our last component, which is the message. The key information that you want to extract from this experience. So I just have one big piece of advice about this, but it's the biggest piece of advice because this is the thing that I have personally messed up so many times. Like, I've really felt the pain of not thinking about this properly. I am somebody who gets distracted by shiny things, and I love to try a new type of activity. I love to try a new type of exercise I haven't done before. To me, that's really exciting. So this is a hard-learned lesson. One of the main reasons that people come out of a workshop feeling like it was a waste of time is that they don't see a clear connection between the activities that they did and the key information or decisions that were made as a result of the workshop. You know, the last thing you want is for people to come out of the workshop saying stuff like, why did I spend half a day moving Post-it notes around on a whiteboard when we could have just had a direct conversation about this one thing? Like, why not just go in and battle about it? Why did we have to do all these extra little things? Why was I doing drawings in Miro when I could have been doing my job? That's not what you want people to feel, obviously. So leaning into everything we've already covered, if our workshop has a clear goal and each activity has a specific outcome that helps us achieve that goal, and if we're being strategic about how and when we want specific people engaging and contributing and bringing their best value to the workshop, and if we're building our visual experiences that are memorable and pleasant to work with, and if we're designing for people having emotions, all of these things are way easier to do if the actual information that we're talking about flows through in a clear and logical way. The rule that I've made for myself is that if I can't explain how the information flows in a workshop in less than 30 seconds, then it's not simple enough. It's not clear enough, it's not logical enough. So that 30-second rule is really helpful. I like to think about information flow as a funnel. So we're starting really wide, our hopes and fears, everything you feel about the project could not get wider than that. And then the mechanism that we're using to make that funnel slightly smaller is the voting system. So what are our shared concerns? So that brings us to, okay, we're turning those fears and we're trying to reframe those fears into opportunities. That's what the how might we statement mechanism is for. And then we want to decide which of those opportunities are most exciting to us, and then we're going to vote to decide that. So what are the most popular opportunities out of the things that we are most concerned about? And then from that, we need to assess which of those most popular opportunities are actually feasible for us to do. So that gets to the final part of our funnel, the impact effort map, where we're assessing, impact and effort. I'm doing that thing where I'm starting to explain all the components, so I'm going to stop. Don't get carried away with adding lots of cool and interesting activities. Just make it make sense. Make your information flow clear and logical, because you want your participants focused on their contribution. You want them focused on the matter at hand. You don't want them focused on where are we, how am I navigating this workshop? Okay, so those are the 4 components of designing a workshop experience from my perspective: engagement, visual impact, emotional response, and message. Just like making a game though, the connective tissue is what makes an experience really sing. And that connective tissue is you, the facilitator. We love PowerPoint. So to finish up the talk, I'm going to give you my top 3 pieces of facilitation advice. First one is time matters. People are giving you a bunch of their time. People are busy. It's really important to respect their time and use it well. That doesn't mean you need to juice every minute of the workshop with stuff to do. It just means that the activities that they're doing need to be worthwhile and it needs to be logical. I would really advise that you set a time-boxed agenda with buffer and make that visible to everybody. So if you've got like a big board where you've got all your activities up, make sure that the time box is there so people can see it. So they're looking at it, they're going, okay, I have 5 minutes to do this thing. It just helps with sort of framing how deep people go. Don't be afraid to break your agenda if you need to. So don't be precious about your schedule at the expense of a really valuable conversation that's happening in the room. In my experience, it's really hard to know when a valuable conversation is happening in the room if you're not yourself present in that conversation. So anything you can do to make the timekeeping aspect of facilitating a workshop take up as small of a space in your brain as possible is going to help you be more present for the conversations. A lot of facilitation, unfortunately, is vibes. I hate to break it to you. So being present and observing the way people are interacting and picking up on things is really important. So what I do for myself is I have like a separate Google account, and I set up my Google Calendar and I put in the blocks of how long each activity is supposed to take. It looks deranged. But then, you know how Google Calendar has that red line that like moves down the thing throughout the day? So I can just glance at it and Google's telling me, okay, we should be halfway through this activity at this point. It doesn't mean that I then panic. Certainly not. I would never panic. I'm very cool. But it just gives you a good indication of like, okay, am I going to have to shuffle things? Are we eating into our buffer? That kind of thing. So you might also just want to have like a person who's your timekeeper, if that works for you or if you have the capacity to do that. So time matters. Secondly, be smart. Just be smart. Be smart in your setup. So if you're thinking about how you structure your workshop visually, particularly if you're doing this in a virtual board, which like most people are now, if you're using a tool like Miro, you can set up frames. So one of the best things that I have ever done for myself, because you're exhausted at the end of a workshop and you do not want to spend time sorting through the information and turning it into a PDF, is I just make the little results section of each activity a frame, so that when you finish your workshop, you just click export all frames as PDF and you're done. It's amazing. You're just not going to have the energy. You're going to be wiped at the end of a workshop. So anything you can do to make getting the results of the workshop as fast and automated as possible to everybody, it's going to help. People want those results straight away because you're going to see actions happen as a result of it faster if people are getting the information straight away. And you don't want to put that workload on yourself. So just be smart about how you're setting things up and know that, you know, the same way you're mapping everyone else's emotions and energy levels, you need to map your own as well. Number 3, you're not the king of the workshop, punk. You're there to facilitate. You're not there to lead the conversation. So if you're a key decision maker on the topic at hand, you probably shouldn't be the facilitator of the workshop. You want to have somebody who can be a little bit impartial running things. If you have a lot of strong opinions about it, but it's not actually your job to lead the conversation or make decisions, just like shut up. Let everybody else talk. Think about facilitation as moving the conversation around the room. Getting the focus of the people who need to be focused, getting the input of the people who can give the most valuable input, giving everyone the chance to be heard. And you can't do that if you're trying to command people. Some of the best advice I have gotten as a facilitator is to just be like water. And it feels like that doesn't mean anything to you until you're actually doing it. So just keep that in mind. As a control freak, it's very hard to practice being like water, but it served me really well. All right, thank you very much. I hope that your next big meeting is not a big meeting and is instead a very rewarding experience. Once again, you can subscribe to my free newsletter and maybe get an email from me at some point. Thanks. Does anyone have questions? That's not a question, that's clapping. Oh, you can come to the mic.
All right. It seems like a lot of the facilitation work is based on, as you said, vibes and being able to empathize with people and pick up on things. What if that's not your strong suit? How do you kind of build those skills? And it also seems like a lot of it needs to be done almost behind smoke and mirrors so people don't feel your influence. But how do you perhaps like ask people where they're at without dropping that smoke and mirrors and making them feel like feel too seen, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great point. I think, first of all, it's like practice. I think being able to run lower stakes workshops with your team, like even just turning something that maybe doesn't need to be a workshop into a workshop can help, because then you can survey your team afterwards. Like, how did you feel when we did this activity? If you picked up on anything that seemed a little bit unusual, you can like use a survey or use a post-workshop conversation to ask them about it. I always have a little like physical notebook on my desk whenever I'm running a workshop, and I write things down if I'm like, that was weird. Didn't really get why you said that. And I always follow up with them. I think just that feedback loop is a great way of learning those things. I also do a couple of different things to get like a vibe check during the workshops. I do just have a thing called vibe check, which is like, I say you have to put an emoji in the chat to describe how you're feeling right now, which is good for people who maybe are not very good at using words to describe how they're feeling, but also gives you an indication if things are going vastly different to the way you think they're going. So yeah, the feedback loop, and just don't be afraid to check in with people. Great question.
Do you have any tips for small teams where everyone is involved in a decision? How do you facilitate that?
Yeah, so a couple different things. One is take turns being the facilitator and accept that you're not going to have a say in the conversation that time around. You might be able to have like a post-workshop opportunity to contribute, but just make sure it's not always the same person who doesn't have a say in that conversation. I just think that there does always need to be somebody who is not trying to take the mic, if that makes sense. So share that role if you can. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this. I guess sort of like on the flip side to the small team question, large teams. So this is something that I'm unfamiliar with, so a little intimidated to be honest, but just sort of interacting with larger teams at that scale, at which point would it make more sense to sort of break that out into smaller groups and have multiple workshops? Or is there an advantage to having sort of like a larger group workshop as well?
Yeah, totally. I think it depends on the type of workshop that you're doing. I've run workshops that are actually like multiple teams coming together. I think it's good to make liberal use of like breakout rooms, give people the opportunity to have that more intimate conversation, particularly if it's a creative workshop. It's always good to break out into a smaller group where people feel less intimidated to say, oh, I thought about maybe this, I don't know if that's dumb. It's like easier to say that with a group of 5 people than it is with a group of 50. Yeah, so breaking out into smaller groups. I say like if you start getting to the point where you have 50 people in a workshop, that's too much. So just think about what is the size where everyone is going to have the opportunity to have something to say with the length of time that you have.
Cool, thanks. You kind of answered that question previously, but since I walked up here, I'll ask it in a different way. So thanks for that. But what about kind of special considerations on in-person meetings versus digital meetings with group size, maybe?
Yeah, totally. So again, it depends on like the physical space that you have available to you. I think it's great to look at, there's lots of formats out there, maybe a little bit more outside of games for doing this kind of stuff that you can take inspiration from. So I know I've spent a lot of my time looking at like safe rituals, like big room planning, which is designed to have everybody physically in a room together, break out into smaller groups. It's designed for like rotating people through conversations. Like we break out into 2 groups and those 2 groups come together, that kind of thing. The actual like coordination of people in a physical space is like a whole separate thing. I think it's good to be able to facilitate the thing that I found the hardest. So I did have a job at one point where it was all about going in and doing physical workshops with people who are not from the game space to do like serious games types of projects. And one of the things that was the hardest was like, how do you broadcast the information that's happening in those small groups to a larger group? That's way easier online than it is in person. And I'm going to talk about stationery now, but sorry everyone. Have you seen those like giant Post-it notes? They're like the huge ones. So just having like a pad of those on every table, because they're sticky on the back. So then when everyone finishes, somebody in the group has to go and stick it on the wall. That was my favorite part. It also was really good at like broadcasting information to a whole room. Yeah. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, that's great. No, thank you very much.
Thanks.
So I'm sure we've had a lot of meetings and workshops where you need a lot of people to know the information that's going to be discussed, but some people, not necessarily contributors, or they don't like speaking up. Do you feel that it's okay to have some people who don't actually talk and are just there to kind of listen, or or if not, what advice do you have, I guess, for trying to tease information out of those kinds of people?
Yes, 3 things. First one is if you have people who are less confident contributing like on the fly, giving people the opportunity to engage with the workshop materials before the workshop. So this is great if you have a digital board and you can give people access to a part of it before the workshop, so they can go in, they can read the kind of questions they're going to be asked. I like to have a little section on a board that's like everybody's private working area, and we sort of make an agreement at the start of the workshop. I'm never going to spotlight your private working area. So you can put anything you want in there. Your thoughts don't have to make sense. Having that section where people feel they can do that. Having multiple different ways of people contributing, so it doesn't have to be always like go on hot mic or stand up in front of everybody and say something. It can be I'm going to write something and I'm going to give it to a representative of my breakout room, giving people of different sort of personality types the option to do that. And the third one, breakout rooms. Yes, so breaking into smaller groups, giving people that kind of opportunity. And the other thing I would say is that if you do have like a really big breadth of different types of personalities and different levels of comfort with this kind of thing within your team, it's good to be really clear with everybody about what their role is in the workshop. So if you're here as a subject matter expert, we have these types of expectations of you. If you're here and maybe you're like a junior person on this team who needs to upskill in this area, I'm not expecting you to say anything, but you're welcome to and we want you to, but you do not have to. You're happy to be here and take notes. That kind of thing, just setting those expectations with your group can be really helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
He asked my exact question. How to
Okay,
get more
great.
resistant people in.
So you talked a bit about having someone in your meeting who might have have a feeling of large ownership over an area, and that looking through the components of your workshop to try and manage that. Do you have any advice for how you can approach that before the workshop? Is there a way you can engage those people and convince them this workshop is worth their time as well?
Yes, totally. So I think that what's important is, as the workshop owner, you're also kind of the salesperson for this workshop and getting everybody's buy-in to like why it's important and why it's valuable. The advice I gave earlier about doing some smaller scale workshops I think is really helpful, because you can really juice them up and like show that this is something that's really impactful for the team. This is something people are engaging with, like it's worth spending our time on this. There have been a few times where I've pitched like really big exciting workshops and they've said you can have half the time to do the same thing, which is always great. So finding ways to kind of make a case for it and build up to it, having that hard conversation with like your overruler type personality about what your expectation is of them in that meeting. I think it's always great to have that conversation directly and find keywords that work well with that person so that you can remind them of it during the workshop as well. Because at the end of the day, if it's like the CEO of the company, it doesn't really matter what the outcome of the workshop is, because if they're going to overrule it anyway. So making sure that they understand that there's value in this process, there's value in the outcomes of this process, there's value in the team seeing you as somebody who's willing to contribute and listen and be part of a democratic decision-making process. Like make it about them a little bit. Yeah.
That's really great advice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. I found what feels like hundreds of years ago, when you were reaching an emotional high point or a really difficult part of the workshop, cookies and muffins brought a lot of goodwill. I haven't necessarily found a replacement in the mirror age. I was wondering if you had some suggestions. Some virtual cookies, perhaps.
Give them a break. Could be like, you have 10 minutes, go do whatever you want. I think that's probably the most valuable thing that you have to offer in the workshop, is that you can tell people they don't have to do anything for a few minutes. I don't think that there's any kind of reward that feels good for everybody. Like I've been in workshops where they're like, now we're going to watch a fun YouTube video. And it's like, I don't care about that. I love fun, as you know, but giving people some time back. Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank
It's
you.
not as good as a cookie, but
You've talked a lot about in the meeting, and there's been some mentions of pre-meeting. So do you do anything, like do you send out a little bit to try and get people in the headspace before a workshop to then come into that? And how much, like, do you set them, some goals that they need to bring themselves? Do you set them a 5-minute task or anything like that, just to help them get in that headspace?
Yeah, there's a lot that I do before a workshop, and it all depends on the nature of the people that are in the workshop, how high stakes it is, like how comfortable and familiar they are with this kind of thing. But I'll give you kind of everything. So the first thing obviously is everyone needs the agenda beforehand. Everyone needs to know what the activities are so that if they are confused by it, they have a chance to ask follow-up questions. Trying to do that like a week and a half in advance if you can. I also like to, if it's like with a dev team who are all working together, I like to do like a little video that you can post in Slack that's just like a quick screen share, like, hey, this is the workshop board, this is how it works, just a quick summary. If you don't have time to do a meeting with people, a video is good because people can refer back to it and it can be like asynchronous communication. The other thing that I like to do, so recently I ran a series of workshops for, I can say this, yeah, for Google. I get sniped. And I was, that was really high pressure. And so what I did to make sure that I could get a read on all the stakeholders and also give them all the opportunity to ask me questions and make sure they're comfortable and familiar with the materials. So I actually just did like a 10-minute call with everybody, like one-on-one, and I took them through the whole board and I was like, I know this part might seem dumb, but I promise it is worth your time because it's going to this part, and just explained to each of them how it works. And it also gave them all the opportunity to just see what the board looks like, get familiar with it. And lastly, I love to do a little trick, which is to have a little activity that you ask people to do when you send out the materials. So sometimes I'll have like a world map and it's like, put on the map the place you most like want to go in your life, or like something like that. It's fun. But it's not actually there to be fun. It's there for me to know who's done it and who's actually opened the link to the board. So that's, yeah, that kind of preparation as well. It's all about just like understanding who your stakeholders in the workshop are and what level of comfort they have and how much hand-holding they need leading up to the workshop. And then some little, spy tactics to see who's actually engaging with it is always good.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're out of time. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.